First and foremost, if you are not caught up on the manga, chapter 978, then I strongly encourage you to do so if you want to avoid spoilers, so unless you have reasons for not minding or caring about this, proceed at your own risk. If you're reading this post, it is part 3 of a massive theory of everything, a theory which attempts to cover all of the One Piece storyline. If you haven't, I very strongly urge you to also have watched part 1 and part 2, before watching this video, link is in the description. In part 3, we will cover the very intricately intercorrelated nature of rocks. Dzebek, the man who wanted to be king of the world, and how this relates to the origin and life of Kaido, Linlin, Shiki, Newgate, and Teach. Then, a somewhat snappy recap and teaser of the finale that has become of part 4, the final piece in this huge puzzle that I call my theory of everything. Now follows some of my boldest and most audacious predictions about various things concerning what is to happen in the story to come. Once again, I will still urge you not to watch this if you think there is even a 1% chance that what I am saying has some reason and validity to it, as if I am right, I will be spoiling the end of the series for you. In that spirit, although I am trying my best to be right, I almost hope to God that I am wrong. Although one, or most likely, all, of these theories are independently incorrect, again, the chance that the One Piece finale itself is on the line is impossible to guess. Please, as always, enjoy. This is where the speculation gets even more nasty. Although, as I said, I am doing my best to predict or call things, we have very little information about a lot of this, and thus this section will sound just as bizarre as the one that came before. However, if you are starting to get a feel for the entire narrative I am attempting to weave, reveal, explain, show, you might see why I connect seemingly sparse dots. You see, I find it all too circumstantial that the Straw Hats fought literal dragons on Punk Hazard. Vegapunk had been doing experiments relating to the devil fruit, and lineage factors, so how does this all potentially relate? I propose this: the world government has, or had, possession of the mythical Zoan, dragon fruit. Rather than feed this to an up-and-coming marine, for the potential of creating a new powerhouse or admiral, I'm instructed Vegapunk to create an actual dragon, using the fruit. Vegapunk had discovered how to extract the lineage factor itself from a fruit, and thus, attempted to grow or otherwise create his own, living dragons. Most of these were failures, as we see at Punk Hazard, some of them are far too small, but, he eventually succeeded. Unimpressed with this eventual success, Im took it to the next level. He wanted to be able to create his own devil fruit, and thus have an army of unprecedented, extremely powerful marines. Eventually, Vegapunk succeeded in this. The fruit that was eventually eaten by Momonosuke was not a failure, it was only presumed so, or perhaps Vegapunk lied about this, starting to catch on to the nefariously malicious nature of the world government that employed him. How could it be known to be a failure, when it hadn't been eaten? Instead, the explosive accident on that island, caused by Caesar, whom he'd been forced to work alongside, allowed an excuse for him to abandon that project. However, Im would not relent. Eventually, his experiments did somewhat succeed, in a horrible, unimaginable way. In some way, he either fed the fruit itself, or combined the final, pure, extracted lineage factor with that of one of the last Oni, descended from the continent pullers of old, and the resulting creature was so unimaginably powerful and durable, that the Marines, at once, realized that they could not kill it. This was the strongest creature in the world, Kaido. This is why he is one of the few characters, and the only Yonko, who has not been shown by Oda as a child. No matter what execution weapons they used, they would shatter. As for when they tried to drown him, I don't think the potential reason for his surviving would be because his dragon form could breathe underwater, although he resembles the Eastern style of dragon, as opposed to the more Western-looking dragons and drakes we see at Punk Hazard, and the one slain by Ryuma in Monsters. They are typically associated with water, and thus it is unusual that his arms be surrounded by flaming rings, and that he can use heat breath to breathe immense beams of very powerful fire. Eastern dragons who did breathe fire were said to be sent from the heavens to earth as punishment, so perhaps it is a fitting reflection of Kaido's unnatural existence. Instead, should he be part dragon due to lineage factor experimentation, and not due to eating a devil fruit, then he would simply be not rendered powerless by the sea, and as such, could simply revert from one form to another to break any bonds placed on him, and return to the surface, or perhaps be powerful enough to be able to hold his breath for a ridiculous length of time, and thus the method be determined to be ineffective. Either way, Vegapunk similarly pursued another form of experimentation, which Caesar attempted to follow: gigantification. Similarly, this line of experimentation is considered a failure, although Caesar himself had some mild success along the same line. Surely someone 500 years ahead of his time would not simply fail in this regard. Again, I think that he succeeded, but abandoned it as a failure due to his increasing suspicions about the world government. In fact, he had but one success before the experiments ceased, resulting in a child that was human, but with the insurmountable strength of a giant, a child which was abandoned at a nursing home in order for it to have some semblance of a life, a nursing home that actually existed on Elbaf, the last vestige and home of the giants. This place was Sheep's house, and the child was Linlin. Although Linlin was born to normal, human parents, the alterations made to her lineage factor were unmistakable, and she was abandoned due to the massive destructive tendencies that she had, with those that abandoned her lying that they would come to retrieve her. As we can see by Mother Caramel's flashback, the giants were feared by even the Marines, until a short while ago, something very important, a trick played on them, wherein Mother Caramel freed the giant pirates that had been captured by the Marines, due to be executed, allowed her to have a false trust with them, and thus stay on Elbaf, selling kids to the world government to be used in the Cypher Pol project. Eventually, Chaos, Linlin, in a frenzy, ate Mother Caramel, as well as all the children, and thus came to have Caramel's devil fruit power. I will address this soon. Eventually, both Kaido and Linlin were rescued, or otherwise adopted by none other than Rox. Xebec. Rox was extremely powerful, and I have my suspected reasons why. He had knowledge about the true history. I came to this conclusion, as with all of the above, after many days of furious, uncontrollable thought, and the thought that led me along this particular path was, why does Teach consider himself an archaeologist? The answer is so, because Xebec also did. Xebec learned of the true history in some way, and either created, or stole, a devil fruit encyclopedia. These, as far as we know, are extremely rare, and when re-watching the anime recently, I took note that when Keiko and Khalifa are given their devil fruits by Spondum, Keiko exclusively states that there are no encyclopedia on them. Only the Vinsmokes have been suggested to have had one, other than Teach himself, and you would think that the world government of all organizations would have these in plentiful supply, should they own one. When Spondum gives Keiko and Khalifa their devil fruit, he is unsure of which they are. Until being eaten, one cannot know of their power, so perhaps Xebec traveled the world, and collected these fruit, documenting their power. How did he know the powers of so many fruit, if he was only able to eat one himself? Well, I think it is because Xebec was the first to discover the secret technique of the Yami Yami no Mi, or the darkness fruit, the ability to have more than one devil fruit power. When a person or animal dies, their soul leaves their body, to be reincarnated by Yggdrasil. When one has eaten a devil fruit and they die, as well as their own soul, the soul and power essence that the devil fruit had imparted into them also leaves their body, to be similarly reincarnated into another fruit. Interestingly, once again, when Keku and Khalifa are first given their fruits, Jabra is afraid of them, saying that if he comes near, the devil inside him and the devil in the fruit will fight each other, and this will cause him to explode. Bluno corrects him, saying he is describing what happens when one eats two devil fruit. This is exactly what I meant when I said that a single body cannot contain more than one soul. The two souls cannot coexist in one vessel, and the consumer explodes. Lucci finishes it off by stating that one would be foolish not to consider the drawbacks of eating even one devil fruit, and that one can only imagine the curse that is inferred by eating two. Xebec, however, found a way to avoid that particular curse, and this was by utilizing the strange and powerful properties of the Yami Yami, as again Lucci in An Ice Lobby says something to the effect of one must learn to best use their devil fruit, as does crocodile. They are only as strong, or as limited, as the mind of the person who wields them. Martial Teach goes after the Yami Yami specifically, using the devil fruit encyclopedia that I've mentioned, because he is aware of this hidden technique that the fruit possesses, and this is why he calls it the most powerful Logia. When we see him fight Ace, we learn that the power of attraction that this fruit has is not limited to material, physical things, not even light can escape a black hole, but other than this, it has the capacity to attract devil fruits, or the very power itself, and thus he can attract Ace towards him in order to strike. As it is capable of attracting the power of the fruit itself, it thus also has the natural capability to nullify the power. This is massive. So far, we know that Haki can nullify a Logia's natural advantage, by forcing the body to become tangible, but this does not nullify the power of the affected Logia. Likewise, Sea Stone is able not to nullify the power of the devil fruit user, but rather robs them of strength as the sea would, to the point where they are unable to use that power. The Yami Yami, thus, fits into an entire category of its own. However, it does have one other strange property that is only shared by one other fruit, that being the Numa Numa no Mi, or the Swamp fruit. These two are the only two Logia that have been shown to not possess the natural advantage that usually makes Logia so desirable, the ability to turn into your element in order to avoid physical attacks. The Swamp fruit is able to negate physical attacks, such as when Caribou turns into Swamp, and thus is able to negate the physical damage of the attack, without physically avoiding it. The Yami Yami, however, cannot even do this, as Teach instead takes even more damage, as his darkness can only attract more pain, and he cannot avoid or negate it by being hit. He can, however, similarly to the Swamp fruit, hold a seemingly infinite amount of storage within himself. Caribou shows this with the multitude of mermaids that he holds within his body, and Teach, with the huge wreckage of the town that he destroys during the fight with Ace, which he not only completely absorbs, but then releases with an attack very fittingly named, Liberation. Awakening. Enlightenment. Why did Luffy and Zoro say not he, it's they? Probably. Why does Teach have a devil fruit encyclopedia? How did Teach obtain two fruit powers at once? Why did he cover Newgate while he did so? How does Teach know that Sky Island does exist? Why does Teach also believe that a man's dreams never die? Xebec knew how to obtain more than one fruit power. When a fruit user dies, the Yami Yami can attract the very soul and power itself, and can be stored or otherwise contained within the body of the darkness user. Thus, the eater of the Yami Yami can wield more than one devil fruit. Xebec, when he fought Roger and Garp, was on the verge of death, and as such, had prepared an insanely brilliant plan for such an eventuation. He knew the nature of his crew, where it was kill or be killed, and had told them of his plan for such an occasion. In this plan, Linlin would utilize the power of her soul fruit, a devil fruit that is truly like none other, in that it can manipulate the very essence of soul itself, allowing her to withdraw soul from something even to the point of it dying, as all of its remaining life will have been extracted. This soul, synonymous, I've theorized, with spirit, will, and haki, can even be placed into inanimate objects, such as her sword and hat, or fire, and thus it can be given life. Using this soul power, Linlin was to withdraw all of Xebec's soul, and place it within each of the crew, to be harbored until a later date, and Xebec could be revived, and Xebec knew that they would betray him. They took the immense soul for themselves, and it was placed unequally within Kaido, Linlin, Shiki, Newgate, and poor, little, infantile Teach. Kaido and Linlin got the largest amount, and this, perhaps, is the debt that Kaido owes Linlin. If not for rescuing him as I posited earlier, I could see it going either way. Shiki received the third largest amount, and Teach received the smallest. As we know, Kaido and Linlin both went on to become Yonko of the New World, and they also had some knowledge of the true history. Kaido knew about Wano country, and how important it was to the world government. He is attempting to create an army of artificial devil fruit users, and Linlin went on to use Caesar in an attempt to perfect the gigantification that had resulted in her very own existence. Shiki went on to rival the man who had defeated their captain, Gol. Roger himself, and attempted to side with Roger in the Battle of Ed War, stating that together they could rule the world. He fought Garp and Sengoku at Marineford when Roger would turn himself in, and broke out of Impel Down. Then, there was Marshal Teach, abandoned, weak, and afraid. He could not even sleep, lest the will of Xebec take over him. You see, when one inherits the soul, spirit, and the very haki of another, they inherit the raw power of that spirit to wield themselves. Kaido and Linlin were normally proportioned during their time on rocks, as we see in the flashbacks, but it was since then that their bodies have swelled to far larger than even their abnormal nature would permit. Shiki, as well, is substantially large, though more normally proportioned than the others, but all three went on to become absolute powerhouses in their respective right, but they were not aware that, naturally, if one inherits the spirit, soul, and haki of someone in a completely literal way, then they will of course inherit the will of that person also. All four of them want to be king of the world, just as Xebec did when he lived. Newgate, I believe, also obtained some of this soul, but by the disbanding of rocks, he was truly disgusted with the way that his captain had treated his nakama, his family. Newgate set out, instead, to make his own family, in the way that he saw fit. Teach, however, was given the smallest amount of soul, though this resulted in the same dream. He wants to be king of the world. He, however, is also an inheritor of the will of the D, and as such, was driven to achieve this goal no matter what. Thus, to Marshal Teach alone, did Xebec leave his most prized possessions, perhaps dismissed by the others as nothing more than insane notes that Xebec had treasured, his notes on the true history, and the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia. With these, Teach, like Xebec before him, believed that he could be the true D that would find One Piece. With the encyclopedia, he targeted what Xebec had used and labeled as the most powerful Logia, the Yami Yami no Me. He finally found it, and used it in fantastic fashion at Marineford, quickly earning his own place as one of the Yonko, after barely being a Skakibukai long enough to abuse that power to screw over the Marines, and break more powerful crew members out of Impel Down, who were immensely swayed by not his, but Xebec's conqueror's haki. Before this, he ran into Monkey D. Luffy, a man who shared his beautiful belief in dreams, and who he saw get ridiculed for asking for information about Sky Island, which most people dismiss as a wild legend. Teach knew it existed, and he said as much to Luffy. Luffy and Zoro, during this encounter, before even learning of haki, or mantra, or observation haki, could sense that there was more than one presence before them, as the immensity of Xebec's spirit was enough for even them to perceive. Im had waited over hundreds of years, he had ruled, and for a great deal of that time, peace, of a sorts, abounded. The giants, much like the fishmen, were largely left to their own ways, after the immense effort Im had exerted to wipe the void century from history. The relative peace was tolerable, for a while. Eventually, however, the few giants that remained and resisted world government rule or meddle, had produced a crew of pirates like none the world had ever seen. Their ships nigh the size of islands, had carried their immense bulk wherever they chose, and only by luck had their reign over the seas ceased. Their captains argued over the size of the sea kings they had slain, and thus Dory and Brogy had duelled for 100 years, before a certain Straw Hat crew passed by, and earned their respect. Enough to end their duel before God, to determine the chosen one by Elbaf's favor, in order to secure their departure. The resulting crew disbanding had likewise allowed their monopoly over the giants to begin. Some of the crew were captured, and at their planned execution, a single Holy Mother had cried out, in a completely scripted soliloquy penned by world government hands, in order to gain sway and trust with the giants on Elbaf. Mother Caramel, thus, came to live at Sheep's house, where the final, abandoned failure of gigantification experimentation was dumped. Now that they had an inn, they wouldn't need such destructive trash. Kashii and Oimo were both captured by the world government, whom had lied to them about having their old captains, Dory and Brogy, imprisoned. They were told to serve for 100 years, as guards to the gates of justice at an ice lobby, but had only served 50 when a certain Straw Hat crew burst over the iron fence, riding upon Rocket Man, and what Zoro calls luck in that moment, allows soaking, nay, God Usopp to gain their aid, informing them of the falsity of the world government's words, and fight alongside the Straw Hat. At Marineford, too, we see Newgate begrudgingly crush the helmet and head of a marine giant, a vice admiral if I remember correctly, I think John Giant. At Dressrosa, the inheritor of the giant's pirates will, Hajrudin, is inspired to fight beside the Straw Hat pirates, swayed by the disposition of that future pirate king, and pledging his crew to the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, alongside many others, in a shared drinking of sake, to bind their will as one. Then, there is perhaps the most important giant in the entire One Piece story, one that is usually forgotten, Jaguar. D. Saul. Why is Saul so important? Well, to even begin with, he carries the will of the D, and he states that everyone in my family has it. I'm not sure why. In my previous theory crafting, someone challenged my assumption that the will of the D was not familial, that is to say, they argued against my claim that the D is not passed down through family lines exclusively, and they correctly forced me to question this assumption. With both Luffy, Saul, and the many other characters that carry the D, we can now see that both a giant, and a human bloodline, both carry the D, and as such, although we see that both the jaguar and the monkey bloodlines carry the D, at some point it had to be inherited in a non-familial fashion. I believe that Saul's family has carried this dream, and culminated in Saul, due to fate, or perhaps luck, in that it was his purpose to ensure that Robin survives the O'Hara incident, so that she may eventually end up on Luffy's crew. With that said, now enters what I believe is one of the most important flashbacks in the entire series, the O'Hara incident. I'll have to wrap this baby up in part 4, which if I do have finished, hope you'll join me in the conclusion, the finale, the huge connecting of all of the dots that I've laid before you so carefully, whether it be complete, rambling nonsense, or just a fun read. Till then, peace.